Good afternoon and welcome. You're watching a special edition here on TVP World. I'm Maciej Mikos.
And I'm Klaudia Czerwińska. The day has finally arrived. Today, the 47th President of the United States, Donald Trump, will officially take office for his second non-consecutive term. We are here to bring you the latest on the ceremony, which is about to begin in just a moment.
We will be joined by a number of experts to give you a perspective on today's events, the President's declarations made in his opening speech, and how his administration will affect international dynamics and security.
It is our pleasure to welcome our first guest of today. Joining us online to discuss the inauguration, Zbigniew Pisarski, president at the Kazimierz Pulaski Foundation.
Welcome to the show.
Good afternoon, everyone. Pleasure to be on.
Pleasure to have you. It's a very special day. I suppose we've been all waiting for this day, looking forward to it to see what it will hold. So the day of inauguration is here. Based on what we've seen over the 11 weeks that passed since Donald Trump was announced to be the next president, are we going to wake up to a new world tomorrow? What's in the cards?
Well, I think that this is the dream that we already experienced a couple of years ago. And actually, a lot of excitement, of course, we are expecting to have starting from the inauguration. But in reality, we know what to expect from President Trump after his first presidency. However, that what we've seen in the last weeks, last months, was an experience of populists getting closer to the reality and becoming slowly a realist. And I think starting from tomorrow, we'll see more Mr. Trump as a realist, less as a man campaigning, who usually is a populist. So that's why his rhetoric will evolve in the direction to be a man of few words, not like right now, speaking quite freely, sharing very different, sometimes contradictory views. So I think that we'll see evolution, but in the end we'll have experience that we used to experience 5 years ago.
So you say it will be rather an evolution than a revolution, because as a matter of fact, what Donald Trump has promised during his presidential campaign was a true revolution. And, the question is, how will his voters react to the real politics of Donald Trump in the next few years? And on the other hand, how determined is he to deliver on his promises?
Well, we have to keep in mind that usually the second presidency of American presidents is the legacy term. So he will be remembered mainly by that what he will deliver or what he will do during the second term. So he will write his history now. At the same time, we are talking about the gentleman who is representing the whole family. And we know that many of areas of their activities were under heavy pressure, including the financial pressure. So I think that he will try on one side write his name in the history in very nice letters, but at the same time he will try to secure the interest of his family, which is usually heavily represented in his administration. And observing the dynamic and direction in which we see the transition team, probably the same we'll see during this second term of his presidency. So visibly including members of the family, closest relatives in the American administration, which is not fully transparent, honestly speaking. So it will be a kind of power struggle in his inner circle, but it will be also a power struggle between him and his supporters, including those that represent large business. This is quite unique that we have so close to the president people who are the richest man in the world, like Mr. Elon Musk. And this is something what we are more familiar observing the authoritarian regimes where oligarchs are heavily influencing politics. However, at the same time, we have to keep in mind, of course, certain proportions, because Mr. Musk is a man who made his money in the private sector less than privatizing public properties, what is the most common experience of authoritarian oligarchs that we see in countries like Russia, for instance. However, it will be interesting to see this power struggle, and I expect a number of clashes where the interests of those three groups, so the Trump family, the US state, and the rich supporters around Mr. Trump, where they will pull the strings in different directions.
And what do you think this sort of a cohesion, this sort of a cooperation of the incoming president with the tech moguls, the tech giants, the businessmen actually means for the US and for the world? What is it a signal of?
Well, actually, this is an area in which US is very competitive, and in comparison, particularly with European Union, where we have problems with over-regulations. So we will see on one side pressure to deregulate American legislation even more, to make it even more competitive and more liberal, particularly under pressure of countries like China. But at the same time, we have Mr. Trump, who is also representing as Republican, but also people who are sponsoring his campaign, people representing oil and gas, fracking industry, which are not always hand in hand with electrification, electric cars, and this group of entrepreneurs around Mr. Trump, which might be healthy in the end, because this is the public policy should be a compromise between different areas of economy. So it could be balanced in the end, but for sure it will be business oriented. And I believe that Mr. Trump will be a good advocate for business sector in US, and sometimes not so much for those that actually voted for him. Because if we think about those that were supporting anti-immigrant policies of Mr. Trump, many of them might be affected directly actually by the legislation bills proposing to send back home those who immigrated to US, even if legally, if they make some crimes, they might be sent back home. And we see that today people who voted sometimes are concerned because it could be in this area actually over-regulated and affect those that supported Mr. Trump. So now it's a reality check. That's what we'll see in the next weeks and months.
Mm-hmm. But don't you think there is a possibility that the three gentlemen that will be in attendance today of the ceremony may attempt to shape also the foreign policy of the United States?
Well, this is something what we haven't seen before. That people like advisors representing the largest capital in the world, in this case Mr. Musk, is making political claims targeted at the domestic political scene in the countries like Germany or UK. This is something new. This is something probably scary to particularly European partners, but I think it will be somehow restrained by the mechanism of American policy. At least I hope, because otherwise it would be something new that might undermine trust in the alliances like NATO, for instance, which is heavily based on the trust. So the moment when you start making claims like towards Denmark about Greenland, this is pretty aggressive statements, which I think are counterproductive, because you can achieve the same goals without making so strong, disruptive claims against partners from the alliance.
So what kind of an agenda do you think this idea of being quite extreme in the statements made, what kind of an agenda does this support? Is Donald Trump going to backtrack and he's going to get at least partially what he wanted, or is he going to push all the way?
Well, I see that Mr. Trump, who is a good businessman, at least that's how he perceives himself, and he likes to use those negotiation tricks. I think that it's a preparatory phase right now. I mean, he is making calls to all these directions. Is it Germany? Is it Denmark? Is it UK? Is it Brussels? Is it Ukraine or Russia? He's making them claims that, well, you have to make an offer for me. And actually, it could be productive in the sense that people are afraid of Mr. Trump's unpredictability, and therefore they will try to satisfy him. So they will make an offer on the day one. So the moment that he will approach them, he will have people will have already ready proposals. So it might fast track the negotiations in many areas, in fact. But the style in which it is done is unfortunately a bit, in my opinion, devastating for the level of trust, because you cannot treat your partners and allies the same as your challengers or enemies. So this is something what I think Mr. Trump should be careful about, to differentiate those two baskets of partners.
So the following question should be whether the US will obtain Greenland soon.
No, I don't think so. I think that what is realistic as a scenario, because this is not the first time when US under President Trump is asking Greenland to be for sale. In fact, that what might happen will be the referendum in Greenland, which in fact was promised by the Denmark government. So the outcome of this referendum might be that people of Greenland will get statehood. And then as a separate state, they can have a close or even closer or strategic alliance with whoever they want. And this is a natural, legally binding transition that could take place. I don't envision that country like Denmark, even if they would like to, they could sell contemporarily country like territory like Greenland to a partner like US. And particularly not under the military threats that were from the Trump people towards Denmark. This is not the way you do it, but the outcome will be that Greenland probably will make some concessions about the bigger number of military bases at its territory. And in exchange, they will receive, for instance, investments in mining or rare materials, rare natural resources mining sector, something what could be constructive for the citizens of Greenland. So it could be a qui pro quo that both parties will get some things, but you could do it without devastating trust between the partners.
I would like to take a moment because we already have a live feed coming from the Rotunda in Washington, where we can see Donald Trump and J.D. Vance already inside. We're just ahead of J.D. Vance being sworn in.
So let's listen.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the 60th presidential inauguration. Today, President-elect Trump and Vice President-elect Vance will take their oaths of office, and we will witness the peaceful transfer of power at the heart of our democracy. For the past year, I've chaired the Inaugural Ceremony Committee, which includes the leadership of Congress from both parties. We thank the committee and Capitol staff and law enforcement who worked so hard over the last year, and especially the last 3 days. You've done a beautiful job, and you have shown grace under pressure. Our theme this year is our enduring democracy. The presence of so many presidents and vice presidents here today is truly a testament to that endurance. We welcome President Biden and Dr. Biden. We welcome Vice President Harris and Doug Emhoff, President Obama, President Clinton and Secretary Clinton, President Bush and Laura Bush, Vice President Pence, Vice President Quayle and Marilyn Quayle. The justices of the United States Supreme Court are with us, all 9 of them I counted, and of course the Trump and Vance families. This ceremony marks what will soon be 250 years of our democracy. It is the moment when leaders elevated by the will of the people promise to be faithful to our Constitution, to cherish and defend it. It is the moment when they become, as we all should be, the guardians of our country. Through war and peace, through adversity and prosperity, we hold this inauguration every 4 years, and today it falls on Martin Luther King Day, a further reminder that we must strive to uphold the values enshrined in our Constitution, the freedoms, the liberties, and, as is inscribed on the entrance of the United States Supreme Court, equal justice under law. But what makes this moment more than a passing ceremony is all who are watching it across the country, the people of this nation, the ordinary people doing extraordinary things. President Kennedy, who at one point worked as a senator in this building and would often walk through this very rotunda, once said, "In a democracy, every citizen, regardless of interest in politics, holds office. Every one of us is in a position of responsibility." With that responsibility of citizenship comes an obligation not to seek out malice, as President Lincoln once reminded us, but to view others with a generosity of spirit despite our differences. With that responsibility of leadership comes an obligation to stand our ground when we must and find common ground when we can. With everything swirling around us, the hot mess of division, it is on all of us, to quote an incredible songwriter who just happened to be born in my state, to ensure that our nation's democracy is our shelter from the storm. There's a reason this ceremony takes place at the Capitol. In other countries, it might be in a presidential palace or a gilded executive office building. Here it is traditionally held at the Capitol, the People's House. It is a fitting reminder of the system of checks and balances that is the very foundation of our government, 3 equal branches of government. That is how, for nearly 250 years, our great American experiment, grounded in the rule of law, has endured. So, as we inaugurate a new president and vice president, let us remember that the power of those in this room comes from the people. The construction workers who build our country, the teachers and healthcare workers who nurture us, the troops defending our freedoms, and yes, the firefighters in Los Angeles putting themselves on the line for us. Our democracy's strength and grit must match theirs. May God bless our nation. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Endurance through the years is the ultimate test. To persevere through time is the truest measure of
And so that was the first address we've heard from Senator Amy Klobuchar, a Democrat from Minnesota, who was also overlooking the Joint Congressional Committee on Inaugural Ceremonies. And she began by spelling out very beautiful words. Democracy is a shelter from the storm.
Oh, yes. Well, it's also worth noting that she's a Democratic senator, so it was a little hint at Donald Trump, one might say, you know, to follow the Democratic route.
But at the very heart of it, it's incredibly important to remember that both the Democrats and the Republicans have to work for their voters. They have to work for America, for the common goal. So this hopefully is going to be a sign of things to come.
Absolutely so. Now, apart from Donald Trump being sworn in today, obviously we also have J.D. Vance, his vice president. And now I would like to ask our guest about J.D. Vance. Now, mostly vice presidents tend to stay in the shadow of the head of the state. J.D. Vance, however, is a kind of outspoken person with strong views. Therefore, what should we expect from his vice presidential term?
Thank you very much for underlining his presence next to Mr. Trump. Not many people remember about it when we are observing the inauguration ceremony, but please keep in mind that we are talking about a natural candidate for the President of the United States after President Trump. So it is a person that has large chances to be the next President of the United States. And saying that, I'm a bit concerned because speaking from the Central Eastern European perspective, the man who is right now in the shadow, it will be in a full light in the next term, probably. And his commentaries about Ukraine, about Russia, about Europe are really making me concerned. And I think we will have to observe carefully what will be his evolution. I hope that being so close to the power will change his views, because for now, I wouldn't feel comfortable if he would decide about the security of Europe and particularly of Central Eastern Europe.
And
so, that's the perspective.
What do you think that actually brought these two together? Because as we reach back in our memory, J.D. Vance tended to be quite critical about Donald Trump before he actually decided to join powers. What do you think brought them together?
Well, actually, you just underlined one of his weaknesses. He seemed to be an opportunist. He seemed to be very flexible with his views, depending what are his current interests. And I hope that this flexibility will evolve in the direction that he will be a statesman. For now, he is, for me, a man who is, as we speak in Polish, karierowicz. So the person that really is focused on getting promotion to the next level in his career. But I hope that the burden of power will make him a statesman, because that's what U.S. and its partners need. But what brought them together simply pragmatism of a campaign. Mr. Trump, who was perceived by many as a man from the elites of New York, needed his wingman as a running mate, a person that represents the ordinary citizens. Exactly like it was said in the opening remarks by a member of Congress. Someone who is ordinary as every citizen, but is doing extraordinary things. So Mr. J.D. Vance is an example of it, because he is a man from a very unprivileged family, and he achieved a lot personally. But he was at the same time, many say, quite ruthless in that. We have to expect that he will be a fully grown up statesman after this term, I hope.
Mm-hmm. But what do you think he will concentrate on, apart from being the second person in the US? What will be his, particular scope of interest within Donald Trump's administration?
Well, typically the vice presidents are doing simply that what the president is either not interested or doesn't want to be focused on. So for sure, the subjects of immigration, subjects of security of the southern border, these are the subjects which I believe he will be responsible for. But at the same time, he is a man representing a specific industry. So high tech, this is something what shaped him. He was working also in venture capital. So I believe that this is an area of his natural interests, and actually area of potential clashes with Mr. Elon Musk and other wealthy people around President Trump. So he will be under heavy pressure, as we like those movies make reference towards Russian oligarchic system. You don't shoot the leader, you shoot the deputy. So I think he will be under heavy pressure by those who do not dare to attack President Trump, but they will not mind to attack J.D. Vance.
So a person to put on the first line. Zbigniew Pisarski, president of the Kazimierz Pulaski Foundation, was our guest. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much
for joining. And now we're taking a deeper dive into what's to come and what has been, from promising to be a dictator but only on a day one to suggesting the Gulf of Mexico should be renamed to the Gulf of America. Donald Trump has made a plethora of somewhat controversial statements in recent months. Our reporter Gabriela Fesnak has more on what Trump's first day in office will look like.
I'm just telling you, this will be the golden age of America.
Donald Trump is set to become president of the United States again. According to his own administration, there is already a busy schedule planned for day one. Trump told Republican senators that he is preparing around 100 executive orders for the first day of his presidency, designed to strike swiftly at the heart of the Biden administration's legislative agenda.
With the stroke of my pen on day one, we're going to stop the transgender lunacy. President Biden's actions yesterday on offshore drilling, banning offshore drilling, will not stand. I will reverse it immediately. It'll be done immediately.
Trump has also made numerous promises to revive the American economy.
We're going to bring thousands and thousands of businesses and trillions of dollars in wealth back to the good old USA.
Trump's plans extend far beyond the U.S. border.
Canada and the United States, that would really be something. You get rid of that artificially drawn line, and you take a look at what that looks like, and it would also be much better for national security. We're being ripped off at the Panama Canal like we're being ripped off everywhere else. A secure, he just said take it back, and it's a good idea.
And even all the way to the Arctic Circle.
People really don't even know if Denmark has any legal right to it. But if they do, they should give it up because we need it for national security. That's for the free world.
Despite his recent comments indicating desire for territorial expansion, Trump has been framing himself as a candidate who will bring an end to ongoing conflicts, particularly in the Middle East and Ukraine.
We'll be talking to President Putin, and we'll be talking to the representatives, Zelensky and representatives from Ukraine. We got to stop it. It's carnage.
According to foreign policy experts, Trump's second term in office will entail a return to realpolitik.
I do think that sort of Trump is signaling that he's going to push back at what he sees as growing Russian and Chinese influence in that part of the world, the Arctic, and also further south of the Rio Grande in Latin America overall.
Trump has been vocal about the need for America to take a firmer negotiation stance, even when dealing with close allies.
Weren't paying their bills. I said, we're not going to protect you if you're not paying the bills. So, in a true sense, I saved NATO, but NATO's taken advantage of us.
While many of Trump's controversial policy statements seem unlikely to come into effect, All eyes in Europe will be on Washington for quite some time.
And now the time has come to move back to Washington. As we know, J.D. Vance is actually swearing an oath of office this very moment. He is administering the oath is Chief Justice John Roberts, and this is the moment.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Chief Justice Roberts to administer the presidential oath of office.
Please raise your right hand and repeat after me. I, Donald John Trump, do solemnly swear
I, Donald John Trump, do solemnly swear
that I will faithfully execute
that I will faithfully execute
the office of President of the United States
the office of President of the United States
and will, to the best of my ability,
and will, to the best of my ability,
preserve, protect, and defend
preserve, protect, and defend
the Constitution of the United States.
the Constitution of the United States.
So help me God.
So help me God.
Congratulations, Mr. President.
So it's official. Donald Trump is the 47th US president. And to talk about today's ceremony and what is to come, we're joined by our guests. We have Vanessa Tenka, lecturer at Collegium Civitas, and Joshua Bergen, NSL program coordinator, Warsaw Security Forum. Good afternoon.
Thanks for having us. Joining us in the studio. The deed is done. What are your expectations for the second term of Donald Trump in the Oval Office?
I mean, I think he's been very clear on what the agenda is going to be for the next 4 years. And it's, I think, consolidation of the MAGA movement, the Make America First agenda. And I think we're going to see a follow-through of these promises that he's made. And so I think for the next 4 years, we're going to see now basically what he's wanted to do and be put into action. And I'll let maybe you elaborate on that a bit more, and then I can jump in.
If you're good with that, then certainly I would agree with my co-host here. The reality is he is going to press forward, both on things he didn't achieve in his first administration, but also this is, as a previous guest pointed out tonight, it is his legacy. This will either make or break, and unlike most presidents, I frankly think that the Trump's second term will be his strongest. Typically, the first term is where power is in place, and the second term is considered lame duck in some way. Trump left office, went back and re-rallied a base, gained new supporters. It's unquestioned that his support from 16 to 20 and now 2024, he's seen growth across every demographic. He will be able to push through in ways he couldn't before. This is government efficiency. This is strong U.S. economy. I think we're going to see renewed effort towards energy production in the United States and beyond. I think we're also going to see a continued push for NATO to be supported by its NATO member states and not simply the United States. That means 2% as a minimum and probably higher for the 32 member states.
Now, as you said, it is his legacy term, and you mentioned transatlantic relations. Now, apart from paying, the threshold Donald Trump would like NATO members to pay, how do you see just common relations between European NATO members and the US at the moment?
Well, I think it's important to note that under administration, the president himself is not the keynote for many of those contacts. There's sub-elements of the administration from DOD, State Department, even elements such as USAID, end up forming connective tissues that buttress those relationships. The president will be present on all the major events and signing ceremonies, etc. But much of the legwork will be done by staff. I think the U.S. relationship with Europe is strong, stronger than would be revealed in the media, but there's no question that Trump is unpredictable, and some of the things that come out of his mouth seems quite offensive to perhaps the PhD level educated personalities across Europe and even beyond.
It seems to be the case that even though you mentioned all these different factors coming into play, Donald Trump is definitely going to set the tone for those 4 years in office, and he particularly chose those members of his administration to be able to have that sort of an exchange. And I would like to point in the direction of the divide and conquer strategy, because when we talk about NATO, when we talk about pushing other NATO members to spend more on defense, we're looking on that on one hand, but then he favors the countries purchasing off-the-shelf U.S. military hardware rather than investing in their own military and own defense industries. What do you think in the long run is going to be the relationship between the U.S. administration and Donald Trump and the EU when we consider the situation on the old continent?
Well, let's touch on the first area, that issue of NATO defense spending. And I think it's important not to say to pay, because at the end of the day, these nation states are spending on their own infrastructure, their own militaries. Yes, always. The U.S. defense industrial base is there and wants to have a crack at it. But let's look at Poland, for instance. If we look at European NATO member states, if we look at pre-Trump 2016, 4 prior administrations, bipartisan administrations, had been encouraging NATO member states to do their part. And there was nothing but feet dragging and hand wringing, and it didn't happen. Trump comes along and acts incredibly undiplomatic by the standards that we normally think of, and we went from something like 4 to now 23 or 24. To your point around Europeans and their actual defense spending, Poland, I think, is a great example. A country that's on track to spend 4.7% GDP, not just on American contractors, but a good deal of the equipment coming out of Korea, South Korea. I think this is emblematic of what will be sort of represented as the right thing by this administration and will not be sort of vilified. If other NATO member states were doing similar, I can't imagine the administration would be giving them a hard time for it.
So do you think that Donald Trump is actually going to reach out his hand and have a conversation, sit by the table and decide, listen, this has to happen, or he's going to continue with a very strong, very particular narrative?
I mean, he's a businessman, right? So everything's going to be with Trump transactional. So he's made it really clear he prefers doing more, rather than multilateral contracts, he wants to do more bilateral. And so I think as long as countries are willing to show their willingness to invest and finance in their own military, he's willing to invest and work with them. So I think he's blunt, up forward, maybe it's not so diplomatic the way he goes about things, but I think he's very transparent about what he expects and what he expects in return. So I think that the EU has already a sense from his former presidency term of what to expect, and I think we'll see a continuation of that. And I think it's just not a surprise. I mean, I think that the EU members knew it was coming, and I think it's, if anything, a further kind of impetus for them to actually invest in their own military. It's to their advantage. I mean, there's been talks about it even before Trump, like, the EU should invest in its own protection, not be so dependent on the US. So I think that it was just that with Trump's style and his more abrupt way of achieving his goals or the agenda, I think that we'll see more of it. And I think that we'll see more of a willingness on behalf of the EU members to engage in that.
That's something we... Oh, right. As we are awaiting Donald Trump's inaugural speech, we're going now live back to Washington, D.C.
Thank you very much, everybody. Well, thank you very, very much. Vice President Vance, Speaker Johnson, Senator Thune, Chief Justice Roberts, Justices of the United States Supreme Court, President Clinton, President Bush, President Obama, President Biden, Vice President Harris, and my fellow citizens. The golden age of America begins right now. From this day forward, our country will flourish and be respected again all over the world. We will be the envy of every nation, and we will not allow ourselves to be taken advantage of any longer. During every single day of the Trump administration, I will very simply put America first. Our sovereignty will be reclaimed. Our safety will be restored. The scales of justice will be rebalanced. The vicious, violent, and unfair weaponization of the Justice Department and our government will end. And our top priority will be to create a nation that is proud, prosperous, and free. America will soon be greater, stronger, and far more exceptional than ever before. I return to the presidency confident and optimistic that we are at the start of a thrilling new era of national success. A tide of change is sweeping the country, sunlight is pouring over the entire world, and America has the chance to seize this opportunity like never before. But first, we must be honest about the challenges we face. While they are plentiful, they will be annihilated by this great momentum that the world is now witnessing in the United States of America. As we gather today, our government confronts a crisis of trust. For many years, a radical and corrupt establishment has extracted power and wealth from our citizens while the pillars of our society lay broken and seemingly in complete disrepair. We now have a government that cannot manage even a simple crisis at home, while at the same time stumbling into a continuing catalog of catastrophic events abroad. It fails to protect our magnificent, law-abiding American citizens, but provides sanctuary and protection for dangerous criminals, many from prisons and mental institutions that have illegally entered our country from all over the world. We have a government that has given unlimited funding to the defense of foreign borders, but refuses to defend American borders or, more importantly, its own people. Our country can no longer deliver basic services in times of emergency, as recently shown by the wonderful people of North Carolina, been treated so badly. And other states who are still suffering from a hurricane that took place many months ago. Or more recently, Los Angeles, where we're watching fires still tragically burn. From weeks ago, without even a token of defense, they're raging through the houses and communities, even affecting some of the wealthiest and most powerful individuals in our country, some of whom are sitting here right now. They don't have a home any longer. That's interesting. But we can't let this happen. Everyone is unable to do anything about it. That's going to change. We have a public health system that does not deliver in times of disaster, yet more money is spent on it than any country anywhere in the world. And we have an education system that teaches our children to be ashamed of themselves in many cases, to hate our country despite the love that we try so desperately to provide to them. All of this will change starting today, and it will change very quickly. My recent election is a mandate to completely and totally reverse a horrible betrayal and all of these many betrayals that have taken place, and to give the people back their faith, their wealth, their democracy, and indeed their freedom. From this moment on, America's decline is over. our liberties and our nation's glorious destiny will no longer be denied, and we will immediately restore the integrity, competency, and loyalty of America's government. Over the past 8 years, I have been tested and challenged more than any president in our 250-year history, and I've learned a lot along the way. The journey to reclaim our republic has not been an easy one, that I can tell you. Those who wish to stop our cause have tried to take my freedom and indeed to take my life. Just a few months ago in a beautiful Pennsylvania field, an assassin's bullet ripped through my ear. But I felt then, and believe even more so now, that my life was saved for a reason. I was saved by God to make America great again. Thank you. Thank you very much. That is why each day under our administration of American patriots, we will be working to meet every crisis with dignity and power and strength. We will move with purpose and speed to bring back hope, prosperity, safety, and peace for citizens of every race, religion, color, and creed. For American citizens, January 20th, 2025 is Liberation Day. It is my hope that our recent presidential election will be remembered as the greatest and most consequential election in the history of our country. As our victory showed, the entire nation is rapidly unifying behind our agenda with dramatic increases in support from virtually every element of our society, young and old, men and women, African Americans, Hispanic Americans, Asian Americans, urban, suburban, rural, and very importantly, we had a powerful win in all 7 swing states, and the popular vote, we won by millions of people. To the Black and Hispanic communities, I want to thank you for the tremendous outpouring of love and trust that you have shown me with your vote. We set records, and I will not forget it. I've heard your voices in the campaign, and I look forward to working with you in the years to come. Today is Martin Luther King Day, and his honor, this will be a great honor, but in his honor, we will strive together to make his dream a reality. We will make his dream come true. Thank you. Thank you. National unity is now returning to America, and confidence and pride is soaring like never before. In everything we do, my administration will be inspired by a strong pursuit of excellence and unrelenting success. We will not forget our country. We will not forget our Constitution, and we will not forget our God. Can't do that. Today, I will sign a series of historic executive orders. With these actions, we will begin the complete restoration of America and the revolution of common sense. It's all about common sense. First, I will declare a national emergency at our southern border. all illegal entry will immediately be halted, and we will begin the process of returning millions and millions of criminal aliens back to the places from which they came. We will reinstate my Remain in Mexico policy. I will end the practice of catch and release. And I will send troops to the southern border to repel the disastrous invasion of our country. Under the orders I signed today, we will also be designating the cartels as foreign terrorist organizations. And by invoking the Alien Enemies Act of 1798, I will direct our government to use the full and immense power of federal and state law enforcement to eliminate the presence of all foreign gangs and criminal networks, bringing devastating crime to U.S. soil, including our cities and inner cities. As Commander-in-Chief, I have no higher responsibility than to defend our country from threats and invasions, and that is exactly what I am going to do. We will do it at a level that nobody's ever seen before. Next, I will direct all members of my cabinet to marshal the vast powers at their disposal to defeat what was record inflation and rapidly bring down costs and prices. The inflation crisis was caused by massive overspending and escalating energy prices, and that is why today I will also declare a national energy emergency. We will drill, baby, drill. America will be a manufacturing nation once again, and we have something that no other manufacturing nation will ever have, the largest amount of oil and gas of any country on earth, and we are going to use it. Let me use it. We will bring prices down, fill our strategic reserves up again, right to the top, and export American energy all over the world. We will be a rich nation again, and it is that liquid gold under our feet that will help to do it. With my actions today, we will end the Green New Deal, and we will revoke the electric vehicle mandate, saving our auto industry and keeping my sacred pledge to our great American auto workers. In other words, you'll be able to buy the car of your choice. We will build automobiles in America again at a rate that nobody could have dreamt possible just a few years ago. And thank you to the auto workers of our nation for your inspiring vote of confidence. We did tremendously with their vote. I will immediately begin the overhaul of our trade system to protect American workers and families. Instead of taxing our citizens to enrich other countries, we will tariff and tax foreign countries to enrich our citizens. For this purpose, we are establishing the External Revenue Service to collect all tariffs, duties, and revenues. It will be massive amounts of money pouring into our Treasury. coming from foreign sources. The American dream will soon be back and thriving like never before. To restore competence and effectiveness to our federal government, my administration will establish the brand new Department of Government Efficiency. After years and years of illegal and unconstitutional federal efforts to restrict free expression, I will also sign an executive order to immediately stop all government censorship and bring back free speech to America. Never again will the immense power of the state be weaponized to persecute political opponents, something I know something about. We will not allow that to happen. It will not happen again. Under my leadership, we will restore fair, equal, and impartial justice under the constitutional rule of law. And we are going to bring law and order back to our cities. This week, I will also end the government policy of trying to socially engineer race and gender into every aspect of public and private life. We will forge a society that is colorblind and merit-based. As of today, it will henceforth be the official policy of the United States government that there are only two genders, male and female. This week, I will reinstate any service members who were unjustly expelled from our military for objecting to the COVID vaccine mandate with full back pay. And I will sign an order to stop our warriors from being subjected to radical political theories and social experiments while on duty. It's going to end immediately. Our armed forces will be freed to focus on their sole mission, defeating America's enemies. Like in 2017, we will again build the strongest military the world has ever seen. We will measure our success not only by the battles we win, but also by the wars that we end, and perhaps most importantly, the wars we never get into. My proudest legacy will be that of a peacemaker and unifier. That's what I want to be, a peacemaker and a unifier. I'm pleased to say that as of yesterday, one day before I assumed office, the hostages in the Middle East are coming back home to their families. Thank you. America will reclaim its rightful place as the greatest, most powerful, most respected nation on earth, inspiring the awe and admiration of the entire world. A short time from now, we are going to be changing the name of the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America, and we will restore the name of a great president, William McKinley, to Mount McKinley, where it should be and where it belongs. President McKinley made our country very rich through tariffs and through talent. He was a natural businessman and gave Teddy Roosevelt the money for many of the great things he did, including the Panama Canal, which has foolishly been given to the country of Panama after the United States. The United States, I mean, think of this, spent more money than ever spent on a project before and lost 38,000 lives in the building of the Panama Canal. We have been treated very badly from this foolish gift that should have never been made, and Panama's promise to us has been broken. The purpose of our deal and the spirit of our treaty has been totally violated. American ships are being severely overcharged and not treated fairly in any way, shape, or form, and that includes the United States Navy. And above all, China is operating the Panama Canal, and we didn't give it to China, we gave it to Panama, and we're taking it back. Above all, my message to Americans today is that it is time for us to once again act with courage, vigor, and the vitality of history's greatest civilization. So as we liberate our nation, we will lead it to new heights of victory and success. We will not be deterred. Together we will end the chronic disease epidemic and keep our children safe, healthy, and disease-free. The United States will once again consider itself a growing nation, one that increases our wealth, expands our territory, builds our cities, raises our expectations, and carries our flag into new and beautiful horizons. And we will pursue our manifest destiny into the stars, launching American astronauts to plant the stars and stripes on the planet Mars. Ambition is the lifeblood of a great nation, and right now our nation is more ambitious than any other. There's no nation like our nation. Americans are explorers, builders, innovators, entrepreneurs, and pioneers. The spirit of the frontier is written into our hearts. The call of the next great adventure resounds from within our souls. Our American ancestors turned a small group of colonies on the edge of a vast continent into a mighty republic of the most extraordinary citizens on earth. No one comes close. Americans pushed thousands of miles through a rugged land of untamed wilderness. They crossed deserts, scaled mountains, braved untold dangers, won the Wild West, ended slavery, rescued millions from tyranny, lifted billions from poverty, harnessed electricity, split the atom, launched mankind into the heavens, and put the universe of human knowledge into the palm of the human hand. If we work together, there is nothing we cannot do and no dream we cannot achieve. Many people thought it was impossible for me to stage such a historic political comeback. But as you see today, here I am. The American people have spoken. I stand before you now as proof that you should never believe that something is impossible to do. In America, the impossible is what we do best. From New York to Los Angeles, from Philadelphia to Phoenix, from Chicago to Miami, from Houston to right here in Washington, D.C., our country was forged and built by the generations of patriots who gave everything they had for our rights and for our freedom. They were farmers and soldiers, cowboys and factory workers, steel workers and coal miners, police officers and pioneers who pushed onward, marched forward, and let no obstacle defeat their spirit or their pride. Together they laid down the railroads, raised up the skyscrapers, built great highways, won 2 world wars, defeated fascism and communism, and triumphed over every single challenge that they faced. After all we have been through together, we stand on the verge of the 4 greatest years in American history. With your help, we will restore America, promise, and we will rebuild the nation that we love, and we love it so much. We are one people, one family, and one glorious nation under God. So to every parent who dreams for their child, and every child who dreams for their future, I am with you, I will fight for you, and I will win for you. We are going to win like never before.
There's definitely a lot to unpack here, and we will keep on listening to the speech. But let's take a look at what's been said so far. The golden age of America begins now. A lot of declarations, a lot of focusing on domestic politics, but very little about the foreign policy and very little about Ukraine. A topic of concern.
Nothing about
here.
Ukraine whatsoever. There was just one slight remark about ending the wars that are already ongoing and not entering any new ones.
What do you think? Why is he taking so long before he actually mentions the subject, which is so important for us here?
Well, I mean, I think because the whole agenda of Make America Great Again is just supposed to be more focused on domestic. Because I think with the Biden administration, it was more looking internationally, what our types of cooperation with our allies were, and how we are stretched. And I think he's trying to put more of an emphasis and focus on the domestic agenda rather than talking about the foreign policy. And again, because I think the Trump administration, unlike the Biden administration and former administrations, it will be more transactional. With Ukraine, I think also there was no mention of it because I think there's a realization that it's not possible today to end the war and that it will take more time. I think, though, he didn't put a definitive timeline in terms of negotiations when they're going to start, so I think maybe that's a way to kind of get out of it. I do think it'll be a topic that comes up again. I think he will revisit it, but not now. I think Hamas is kind of like the convenient go-to of, look what happened, as I promised.
We're focusing on the positive that is taking place
Let's see what we have done. And I think that, this golden era, I think, is just to focus on that positive, what's going to be achieved. And I think that to kind of revitalize and bring back hope for people who felt really just ignored about the domestic concerns. And so I think that's why the number one focus that he mentions time and time again is about the borders, with immigration, because this has been an ongoing concern. And so when he talked about his executive order, the first thing he's going to do, he's going to send troops to the border.
He's going to send the troops to the border as well.
Yeah. So I think that's why really he's focusing more on the domestic agenda.
Should we read this as a signal?
I think, he's made it clear that they're going to reassess allies and the partnerships. And so I think whatever makes America great again and what puts America first, as long as working with our allies and other partners, it aligns with those goals, then yeah, it's in their favor to work with them. But again, he's transactional, he's a businessman, so I think that domestic concerns will be at the forefront. And so when engaging in foreign policy, it will be a fusion between, I think, the economy and also national security. We're going to see them fuse together. And I think that's bipartisan. I think that also during the Biden administration, there's more this awareness that we need to combine both. And that's not really unheard of because China already does it, India already does it. And for a while, I think we've kind of kept them separate. But there's this realization that it is actually a security concern, the economy. We're stretched thin. We need to bring manufacturing back to the U.S. So I think that's why, again, there's this kind of focus zooming in on domestic agenda issues.
So we're somehow in the fog when it comes to Ukraine and Donald Trump's ideas. Hopefully there is an agenda awaiting Kyiv, and they have a clear vision how to end the current conflict. Vanessa Tenker, lecturer at Collegium Civitas, and Joshua Bergen, as NSL program coordinator at Warsaw Security Forum, were our guests this afternoon.
Thank you so much for joining on this very special day.
Thanks again.
And maybe we can revisit this another time, all these other issues.
Oh,
absolutely so. You're always welcome. Always welcome.
Thank you.
So now we'll have a very short break.
Media personality, businessman and billionaire Donald Trump served as the 45th President of the United States from 2017 to 2021. His re-election in 2024 makes him only the second president in the country's history to serve 2 terms non-consecutively, and it's safe to say he's the first of his kind. Often with little regard for nuance, Trump's assertive demeanor and larger-than-life presence bolstered his America First image, sometimes to the detriment of his own country. For example, in the case of a trade war with China, or his willingness to meet with despotic leaders. His first term ended in scandal when he refused to accept losing re-election to Joe Biden and presided over the January 6th Capitol riots when supporters broke into and occupied government buildings. But even before that, Trump faced the stigma of impeachment in 2019 for abuses of power, again in 2021 for incitement to insurrection, and then in 2024 was convicted for falsifying business records. In more recent revelations, the Department of Justice has also alleged there was sufficient evidence to try him for attempting to overturn the result of the 2020 presidential election, which he lost. But the American Constitution forbids the prosecution of a sitting president. As a result, his typically bold approach to politics remains very much alive. He has spoken about using his second term to acquire Greenland and the Panama Canal, to extend the influence of the US beyond its current borders.
It's going to be only America first. America first.
Prioritizing domestic issues over international ones continues to resonate with Americans in his second term. People are hoping to regain control of the country's borders and reduce Washington's involvement in international conflicts. Meanwhile, environmental issues and healing political divisions are much less important. Nevertheless, Donald Trump continues to see himself as a would-be peacemaker, wanting to meet with Vladimir Putin to discuss Russia's war in Ukraine, albeit without the involvement of Kyiv.
And we're back in our studio during our special edition here, the inauguration of Donald Trump. Definitely, considering the inaugurational speech, a lot to unpack, a lot of domestic politics being mentioned, very little on the foreign policies and the situation in Ukraine. And in order to discuss this, we're actually joined by our next guest. Joining us online is Scott Lucas, professor at the University College Dublin. Welcome and thank you for joining us here on this very special day.
Thank you so much for having me.
Pleasure.
Well, let's start by asking again, why was there nothing about our very corner of the world? Why was there nothing about Ukraine, nothing about the eastern flank of NATO?
Because, as your previous guest mentioned, this speech isn't primarily about foreign policy, but in fact, I don't even think it's primarily about domestic policy. This speech is primarily about me, Donald Trump. You'll note that after that reference to a golden age of America, sort of that glossy line, greatest country, yeah. It was, the Justice Department has been weaponized against me. look at my glorious election victory, which of course is an implicit way of saying, you know, I actually won that 2020 election. Look at how he talked about his enemies within the deep state. And then, of course, what Trump is doing to that crowd of dedicated Trumpists in there is then he is creating around him this person, remember, who said, I was saved by God to make America great again, to build around that cult of personality who his enemies will be. So his enemies will be, the promised one. And who are the enemies? The enemies are migrants and asylum seekers, which he recast, of course, as criminals crossing our border. Not mentioning that immigration dropped in the United States across the Mexico border by 61% last year. Who are the enemies? The enemies are, of course, the terrorists who lurk out there, which means, of course, that as soon as phase one of the Israel-Gaza deal is finished, and Israel probably returns to war, and there will be no phase two, what does Trump do then? But then the enemies are those who promote diversity, equity, inclusion. We need to make sure that we don't talk about the importance of race and gender matters in the United States. And of course, transgender people, they're an enemy, so they no longer exist. I mean, this is a really, really dark speech. Now, what does that mean in terms of foreign policy? He doesn't speak specifically about Ukraine. What he did was, first of all, is he has issued a token case that he's going to use as a punching bag. And that's the Panama Canal. And that's going to be really interesting, because what he said about the Panama Canal was blatantly untrue, that China controls it. But is he honestly saying he's going to take military action to seize part of another country? Now, why do I mention that to you? Because what the broad message here is that the rule-based international order does not matter. Alliances do not matter.
So where would you say this puts us, the European, where would you say it puts the European Union when we look at the whole spectrum and we look at what you just said a moment ago? Alliances are not important. What does it signal for the European Union? And is Europe ready? Because over the last 11 weeks, considering Donald Trump's victory, European countries were trying to become sort of colloquially Trump-proofed. Against whatever was to come after today, after the inauguration.
You just summarized what it means, and that is that the European Union and NATO need to be able to be resilient. They need to be able to continue to defend Ukraine against the Russian invasion. They need to guard against wider Russian threats that take place, with no guarantee that the Trump administration will be an effective part of the economic or security alliance, and no guarantee that Donald Trump will choose those alliances over Vladimir Putin. Now, we knew that from the first term. Remember, we knew that in the first term when Donald Trump used to insult NATO allies, when he and his inner circle tried to break up the European Union. We knew that. One strategy that Poland pursued was to flatter Trump. You know, the idea of, we'll have a Fort Trump here for American soldiers. You know, give him something that makes him look good. But you can't just keep flattering him. That doesn't constitute a strategy. So what you have to do is reach out to other European countries, and you have to reach out to other parts of the U.S. government, to the Pentagon, to the State Department, to the economic agencies, hoping that Trump doesn't undermine and demolish those agencies in the meantime.
But Donald Trump also said something about exporting American gas all over the world. And given the fact, as we have already heard it from multiple times, that he's a businessman, could there be, you know, this sort of a gas for security deal?
Now, you know, you can make deals for gas, and deals are already being made for gas, as we know, in part because Russian supplies, you know, Europe is detaching itself from that. So those deals continue anyway. The problem here is that you're not talking about a gas for security deal. You're just talking about a gas for making money deal. I mean, there's no sense that Donald Trump is thinking about European security here. You have to hope that those around him, and I'm going to be looking at the National Security Advisor, Mike Waltz, I'm going to be looking at the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, that they're thinking about these things, that his envoy, Keith Kellogg, is thinking about these things. But remember, we are at a point, and this hasn't been talked about that much, Donald Trump's nominee for the Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, is pro-Kremlin. Think about that. That rather than being pro-alliance, his Director of National Intelligence is supportive of the country that is invading Ukraine. That is where we are. So yes, I think you have to deal with Trump on a transactional basis. He is the President of the United States, but you've got to work beyond him as well, both in terms of within the American administration and also with your allies in Europe, in the United Nations, and in other parts of the world.
Going back to what you said just a moment ago, we see that Trump, rather than making Europe less reliant on U.S. security guarantees, when he does that, he is actually risking having more Russian, more Chinese influence in Europe. When we look at the sphere of influence, do you think it's possible that Trump is actually going to allow it? Because after all, he's a businessman, as our other experts mentioned before. So is he going to really gamble and try and just open up Europe to whatever different sphere of influence there is out there?
Trump doesn't care about the expansion of Russian and Chinese influence in Europe. Let me explain why. Donald Trump has been a businessman who has tried to engage Vladimir Putin since 2013, when he ran the Miss Universe pageant in Moscow and desperately wanted to meet Putin. Donald Trump, of course, relied on Russian cooperation in 2016 as part of his attempt to become president. Donald Trump in 2017 was told by Vladimir Putin Crimea is part of Russia. Donald Trump is siding with the autocrat who flatters him rather than countries who actually question his policies. And let's take another example in the past 48 hours. Donald Trump, who supposedly is going to implement tariffs on China, has actually said, because he got a phone call from Xi Jinping, Xi Jinping is a wonderful president. He's a wonderful man. The rule with Donald Trump is he who flatters Donald Trump is the one he likes. And I'm afraid that doesn't give you a priority as Europe, despite the fact that you've had decades of a security alliance with the United States.
I would also like to ask you about, well, let's say an extremal aspect of of the U.S. Foreign policy to come. Will there soon be a mission to Mars under Trump's presidency?
Well, certainly Elon Musk would like to think so.
He was very happy about it. He seemed incredibly happy when he heard that.
Well, I'd be incredibly happy if I was I'd be incredibly happy if I was getting billions of dollars from the U.S. government for SpaceX.
That was my
which is where Elon Musk relationship started with Donald Trump, as well as making sure that Donald Trump did not try to block electric vehicles because of Tesla. Now, whether that is feasible at this point, we are only talking about at this point in terms of SpaceX being able to take rockets further up into space. The question of getting to Mars not only is do you get to Mars, but are you able to sustain life to go up all the way to Mars? Are you able to sustain it on the planet if that's your ultimate ambition? Now, NASA has done wonderful things. I happen to be was raised in the town where NASA developed the mission to the moon. I have nothing but admiration for those folks. The problem here is, are you talking about a national project for the good of mankind to go to Mars? Or are you talking about a mission to Mars, which is primarily because of the egos of two men, Donald Trump and Elon Musk?
I think it would be nice if there would be an equal amount of interest in preserving the natural environment and preserving whatever we have here.
No. We had no Green Deal whatsoever. No.
No. That's well said. And I will say about climate change here, because we're going to get the executive orders today, and we're going to get a rollback of climate change initiatives. We will get, of course, the stripping of regulations from fossil fuel companies, but we will also get effectively orders that will go out to agencies to downgrade climate change as part of their missions. Remember that in the first Trump term, America's environmental agencies were banned from mentioning climate change on their websites. You have a climate change denier who is the president of the United States at a time when this issue, as you folks know in Europe, as I know in Ireland, as people in California know right now, is a critical issue. And it will only become more critical. And I'm afraid that if it's a question of burning down the house, If Donald Trump can make money out of it and get glory, he doesn't care how far the fire spreads.
Scott Lucas, professor at the University College Dublin, was our guest this evening. Thank you very much, Professor.
Thank you. Stay safe.
Thank you.
So we just watched the end of the inaugural address by the 47th President of the United States, Donald Trump, only a second ago. Over the past 11 weeks, the world, considering quite an unpredictable nature of the current president's decision-making, speculated about how his next term in office is going to look like.
And so to better understand the future, it's good to have a reference point in the past. And joining us now is Sasha Farbach to tell us an overview of Donald Trump's first term in office. Sasha, the floor is yours.
Right, indeed. So let's take a look. I mean, already we started out with 2017 with that speech, a very different one from the one we've just heard just a few minutes ago. It was about American carnage. It was a dark picture of America. And right now, it is a golden opportunity. He imbued this whole speech with a lot of positivity. But at the core of it is, once again, America first. This is his modus operandi, but this time it's about moving this forward. It's about moving it positively. So let's take a look at some of those main things of the previous first term, and let's just see what happens. So NATO and Trump. So this is one of those first trips he took abroad back. If you look at his first term, very much spurning allies that they're not paying enough, saying that also recently on the campaign trail again, that he would not be supporting those countries that are delinquent, not paying their bills. But the way you cut it, if you compare NATO's spending from back in 2017 to now, it has changed drastically. Let's look at the next slide here real quickly, and I'll just illustrate what that means. Look at that. So in the orange, you see 2017, some of those select allies of the 32 countries. So look, and all across the board, at threshold 2%, everything has risen. Poland already on that 2%, but it's risen since then. Look, Estonia, the UK, Germany even, Romania, Norway, and Sweden is on here because Sweden, remember, is a new member of those 32 allies. So, but overall, all of this has shifted up. And Trump will try and say that this was him. He said this in Mar-a-Lago not so long ago, that it was because of him that he saved NATO. So let's go on to our next slide now and look at also some more details about also climate change. So in his speech, he said that he is going to reverse rollback that green efforts about electric vehicles. But remember, back in the first term, one of the biggest polluters, the United States, in the world, pulling out of that Paris Agreement in 2015, saying this is not in the interest of the United States, this is against U.S. sovereignty, bad for U.S. workers, so he pulled out of that. And this is likely going to follow. Biden was back in. Let's see if one of those first executive orders will be that Trump once again steps out of the Paris Accords. But through his speech, it does sound very much likely. So let's go on for the next slide now, and we're going to be focusing on now also achievements in the first term. Trump, very much, as much as he was adversarial and a businessman transactionally, he did a lot for Central and Eastern Europe. Just a couple pictures here. Here is Trump in Warsaw at a speech, very much saying how close that relationship is, commending the Poles, also saying very much referencing Article 5 in NATO's treaty. So this very much also opened up a lot of dialogues with Poland and the United States. Defense has been on the up, very much close to the Americans and the efforts of the Poles, eventually leading to more in terms of cooperation, in terms of troop numbers. Now we have a permanent base. So all these things started around 2017, 2018, when Trump really pushed up those efforts. So let's look also here, 3C Summit. So this is a key sort of initiative that's come out of Croatia and Poland back in 2015. It's about connectivity, energy. There's Trump there. He was at the summit in Warsaw, very much also investing in that. So this is about infrastructure. This is about energy independence. Now, this has kind of been on the low burner for the last few years. And now the hope is from these organizers that he will be coming back. There's actually another summit in Warsaw at the end of April. So we'll see if he attends that. And one of these infamous meetings between President Putin, also in Germany, one of his first trips abroad as well, and also looking at this kind of effort about what kind of relationship do these two have. And ultimately, much will be on, let's say, the future books, what that relationship will look like in future. I mean, he didn't reference Ukraine at all in his opening speech, and clearly many, many questions now about his phrasing of peacemaker, but generally very much in that first term, many more other things he's done. But for Eastern Europe, and particularly Central Europe and Poland, defense ties have been very much growing since that. And I think that looking forward, that's only going to continue no matter who's in charge in Poland. And this gives Poland certain leverage, I think, in terms of NATO and the alliance with Donald Trump. We'll see how it works out. And that's a bit of a snapshot here of Trump's first presidency. Let's see how the next one goes. And we'll be watching, of course, with high interest.
Sasha Falbach, thank you very much
for
this report. We'll meet Sasha again in a few minutes.
But before that happens, it is also important to remember about the energy security, energy being part of the hybrid warfare, and nuclear energy is one of the particular subjects that we're going to take a closer look. The U.S. will play a pivotal role in Poland's efforts to introduce nuclear power to its energy mix in the next decade. Experts emphasize, however, that in future projects, the government should adopt a more structured approach.
Incoming U.S. President Donald Trump is first and foremost a businessman with a profit-driven approach to power. And Westinghouse, the U.S.-based nuclear energy giant, will play a pivotal role in Poland's landmark energy project.
The American nuclear industry was chosen by the previous government as the first one to build the first Polish nuclear plant, which is to be delivered in the 30s. The choice was obvious for security reasons.
Located in Chocewo County in the Pomerania region of northern Poland, the planned nuclear power plant will be the largest infrastructure project in the country's history. Powered by 3 AP1000 reactors, estimated construction cost of the nuclear plant is an eye-watering €45 billion. The Polish government wants to cover nearly a third of the cost by itself, with the remaining 70% financed through state-guaranteed debt. But experts stress that for future developments, a more structured approach for evaluating offers, including terms, conditions, and financing, is needed.
We need to think of the role for the second and potentially even third nuclear power plant, who they will serve, the industry, district heating. We need to find out this model because this will be also crucial for the financing of this power plant and associated state aid.
The current strategy published by the previous administration in 2021 assumed that Poland would receive up to 9 gigawatts of power from nuclear energy, which implies the construction of at least one facility, potentially by the US provider. A new strategy which will hopefully address these and other energy-related concerns is set to be released in the coming months.
And joining us now live in our studio, we have Wojciech Przybylski, political analyst from Visegrad Inside. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Considering what we've heard, it's been a very packed, so to speak, speech, the inaugural speech by current President Donald Trump. And it really does show that he focused mostly on his role in making America great again and giving it a golden age. But we didn't hear pretty much anything about the foreign policy. We haven't heard anything about our corner of the world. What would you say? What does that say about Trump's approach towards our corner of the world, Central and Eastern Europe, and his steps that he'll take in weeks and months to come?
In the inaugural address, we've heard mostly an inward-looking story. That's true. But it's not entirely true that there was no reference to the external world. Donald Trump has pledged that not only he will have effect on the future of peace, and he will be the deal, not a deal breaker, but the solidifier of nations across the world. So no more wars. That's what he pledges and promises. That's
been very broad.
That's quite a pledge, for a powerful nation, for a powerful position he has. We will see if indeed there is no war, that the United States is involved and needs to be engaged in order to be resolved. So that's one. He mentioned Israel. That is and has been throughout his campaign #1 issue on which he's been campaigning, that he is close and influential for the Middle East process and the relationship to Netanyahu. And the very fact, and he referred to that there isn't indeed a deal between Hamas and Israel and Netanyahu's government, and some prisoners, some hostages were released. He ascribed already to his influence in foreign policy. And finally, he said the Panama Canal. That is the soft belly of America in South America, Latin America.
But you need to admit this is not our corner of the world.
Well, that tells a lot about where the focus of his administration will be. His primary interests, his primary concerns has been defined and laid out here perfectly well. And for everyone else, he just wants everyone to be put into rest, put in peace, lay down their weapons and arms, and stop fighting because he has other priorities. Now that is going to be a difficult task, and he'll be confronted with realities on the battlegrounds of today's world, of course. We'll see how this happens, how this unfolds. But the pledges and his foreign policy priorities have been clearly marked here, and indeed they move away from what we would expect is Central Eastern European security and the war in Ukraine.
Talking about Panama Canal, Donald Trump mentioned China, who in his opinion has taken over the canal. Now, the question is, does it mean that Donald Trump portrays China as the main rival of the US worldwide? Therefore, he will now focus, with on competing rather China than what's going on in Europe?
Hearing from a number of his senior appointees for the State Secretary of Treasury, we have heard that indeed his people, his team, is looking at a major security challenge coming from China primarily, but also from Russia. So these are other elements we haven't heard in the inaugural speech, but we know they will be playing out in a number of his policies, including economic policy, trade policy. The fact that the tariffs are going to be multi-layered and they will be prioritized around elements of, or the circles of security, to influence both the foes and competitors and allies in bringing the circles of influence together and closer to America, that tells a lot about how this foreign policy will be conducted. But it won't be, if that is the case, how it will be conducted, it won't be that different. It will be different, but it won't be that different from what we have seen in the previous administration. The US and Biden administration has just announced one other chapter of the economic policy that limits supply of advanced chips, advanced microprocessors to Central Eastern Europe, Portugal and Switzerland, leaving just the free access to the core of the rest of the Europe. It tells a story that has been already laid out in the policies told by, among other, Jake Sullivan, National Security Advisor to Joe Biden, that America is reprogramming overall throughout different administrations the approach to security, through economic toolbox. And we're going to see more of that, different flavors, probably more aggressive geoeconomic approach, but more of the same, because what we see in this administration is one other display of an effort to remake the world so that America is in the center of the economic and power security game.
Do you think that a trade clash between Europe and the US is inevitable? Because as you gentlemen just spoke about it a second ago, there's definitely that tension on the line US-China, but what's going to happen on the line EU and US?
So strangely enough, we haven't heard anything about tariffs. Donald Trump has announced immediately after being elected that there will be tariffs on Canada, there will be tariffs on Mexico. There is a hint there will be more tariffs and there will be tensions with China. Europe is not mentioned there, strangely enough. Is it a good thing or a bad thing? We'll see.
However, if I may interrupt you, I remember Donald Trump saying that Europe has to give something back to the US for the American protection.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we hear that for not for the first time. We've heard that before. It is being told by different representatives of political elites in the US that the deal that once kept US and Europe together, that was contributing to security, with Europe paying, at Western Europe at that time, up to 60%, usually 4% GDP to the defense, and also contributing troops on the ground to contain the key enemy, which was the USSR at the time, formed, together with Japan and other parts of the West, a unified response which was security-driven, value-oriented, and economy-propelled. Now, US wants, apparently, to come back to a number of these issues. And again, I'm not relating only to Mr. Bessent, who's going to be next Secretary of Treasury, but Jake Sullivan, the same, said in, so the same person I mentioned from Joe Biden's administration, April 2023, that we are in the same situation that we cannot reverse globalization. So we cannot stop trading with our foes and enemies, key rivals. But we need to rethink, both US and Europe, who are we trading and how much we're spending on defense. So this expectation is from both sides of the political elites in the US. It's not going to change. It's something that Europe has to reckon with, has to overcome the age of globalism that has dominated the last 3 decades. And we need to move forward also to build Power Europe. That's a Polish, that's a European response we need to focus on that will build an effective partnership in the future with the US as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, there was a little about tariffs. There was, however, nothing about sanctions. Does it mean those are off? Or will Donald Trump rather heap more on Russia to gain a better position in future negotiations?
Well, one thing we know about sanctions, it's relatively easy, but not always, to put sanctions on the table. It's hard to take them out from the table. So once in, they're not so easily being removed. And that's the history of sanction policy for more than a decade now. So we're going to see what he's going to do. He promises, of course, that he can remove some of the sanctions in order to have Russia sit at the table and stop the attack on Ukraine. That's part of the package laid down by General Kellogg, who's the special envoy or special representative for making the peace talks or ceasefire talks between Russia and Ukraine. That's part of the offer. So we're going to see, and we might need to prepare that this may be put on the table, and definitely will embolden some of the political voices within Europe, like Viktor Orban, Robert Fico, who speak about this for a long time already, and it's in the key interest of Moscow. But I don't believe Americans will be that naive or stupid to give it away for nothing. They will want actual deliveries deliverables from Moscow, which is, from the point of view of Polish skepticism about Moscow's intentions, very unlikely.
When we talk about the next administration, I wonder how the foreign policy is going to be shaped by the new administration. We've heard before that a number of experts mentioned, oh, this term in office, the second term in office, is going to be more on the power play. It's going to be very similar to the first term. However, I wonder how this new administration and those particular choices that Donald Trump made are actually going to affect the EU.
One thing we know for the EU is that during the first Trump administration, European Union became much more political. Not that it wanted to be, but it had to become more political in its decision-making. The European Council has risen to the role of really making the decisions in response to Donald Trump's policies, because the Commission does not have the powers and does not have the ability to take swift and difficult decisions at the level that is required to respond to American policies. So that's for sure. We're going to see more and more political discourse, political decisions involving key leaders from across the bloc, meeting, discussing, taking the response to the next level. And maybe that's a good thing, but at the same time, we are going through electoral periods, another electoral year in Europe. We have Germany, Poland, Romania, Czech Republic, many other countries as well, Moldova, outside of the EU.
Great many elections coming up in the region.
These elections will define, are we strategically aligned on the key answers to our priorities, to European priorities. And there is an enormous role for Poland and then Denmark to play in policy shaping during the 2 subsequent presidencies in the European Council this year.
Judging by what's
Denmark is in a kind of difficult position lately.
Indeed.
Talking about Greenland, of course.
But I haven't heard anything about Greenland in the speech now, so Let's keep it quiet for now.
Interesting, just like Canada. The idea of Canada becoming a part of America also, and sort of an interesting development. But when we look at the European Union, when we look at the elections, we've also in recent weeks heard about Mr. Musk being very vocal about his opinions regarding some of the elections, some of the parties that are going to take part in the election, like, for example, the AfD, Alice Weidel, the talk on Platform X. Do you think that Donald Trump and his administration will try to pull the strings and somewhat influence, to a certain extent, the results of the elections in the EU, especially considering that Mr. Trump is quite close with leaders such as Viktor Orban?
There are two things. One is that every administration, US administration, European administration, has their preferences towards who they want to talk to on the other side of the political process.
Obviously.
And these actions and preferences are hardly ever effective. I mean, look how many times the US have actively tried to undermine different governments and how it backfires. So it's not, one thing is to want it, the other thing is to effectively do that. And last but not least, Elon Musk doesn't seem to be best equipped to influence these elections. If you look at the last interview he did with Alice Weidel, it was a big yawn. It was boring. I don't know how people got so excited. I mean, people got excited before it happened, but if you watched it, if you really had to, and if you then looked at what was inside.
But I think he should not be underestimated when you consider him being the owner of X platform that everyone has access to, and for many people, this is an opinion-making tool. It's not only about that singular interview, but it's about the whole spectrum, the whole landscape.
By now, I see a great surge in many other platforms that form the opinion, and we have Blue Skies, we have Instagrams, we have YouTube, we have TVs. The plurality of opinions is widely distributed across the internet, so Elon Musk does not have monopoly on that. Furthermore, he's undermining his position by becoming part of the administration. He's no longer the underdog challenger, the interesting, exciting person. He's the boring guy from the government. So if I had a crystal ball here, I wouldn't say Elon Musk is going to go far in his enterprise of doing the, political influence. It doesn't seem to me. Well, what he's going to do, he's trying to save his own buttocks, pardon my saying, but from the legislation, both in the US and in the EU, that may hurt and cost him dearly. So what he's trying to do is go behind Donald Trump, advance his ideas, use all the tools he has, including X, including promising him trips to Mars and whatnot. I'm sure there will be base for Trump on the Mars, already promised. And he's doing all of that because he wants to save his money. He wants to save himself probably from jail time, because there would be a lot of money to pay probably he doesn't have.
You said that the U.S. meddling in foreign elections usually backfires at Washington. So the question here is, looking at a long-term perspective, is Elon Musk, promoting far-right views in Europe, which it's no secret that these parties are often closely connected to Moscow. Could this also backfire, and pretty soon, at Trump?
Well, we'll see about Trump, but for the business of Elon Musk, there are dark clouds getting closer and closer. Of course, he also has some chips to trade with the EU, because we want satellites to be put on orbits from Europe, and he's got those rockets to put them up. But this is going to be a hard negotiation where I think he's trying to build up his position while he's in a weaker situation because of the processes, the European Commission infringement processes that the Commission has initiated. So we're going to see if he can defend himself again, rather than go on offensive and change anything.
Mm-hmm. There's one more thing I wanted to ask about. I guess it has something to do with the U.S. foreign policy. Donald Trump mentioned that he will treat cartels, drug cartels, as foreign terrorist organizations. Now, what does this imply? That Donald Trump will now seek to combat these cartels in the country of origin or something like that? Sending U.S. troops to Peru or whichever country to find cartels, to fight cartels?
It is a serious problem both in the US and in the EU, and I can imagine that it's not the first attempt the US president and administration wants to curtail the influence of these global organized crime groups that become more and more destructive for the not just the personal histories of families in the US, but the economy and the political system. So he's expanding the toolbox. Whether this will be effective, well, we are going to see. But definitely there is not a minute to waste in trying every effort and every resort of curtailing their influence on our democracies, frankly speaking, economies, and the way of life, which is protective for the children in the West and around the world from the influence these groups are spreading.
So with that historical order of having this border being controlled, of sending the military to the border and making it a very clear point and putting it very high on the agenda, I feel like Donald Trump crossed a certain line when it comes to, and we've heard that from Mr. Scott Lucas as well, that he's crossing the line of what's ethical and how much further can we move. But is he sort of starting a new trend, for example, that could potentially spread further, like to Europe, for example, when it comes to crossing the border? I mean, we've had that situation ongoing between Poland and Belarus on the Polish-Belarusian border when you had immigrants trying to cross the border and the country trying to stop them. Then we had Frontex being involved. So do you think that there could be a possible trend that is going to plant itself and spread itself from the US now?
Yeah, I think we need to look at borders individually and the cases individually. Mexico is not sponsoring migration to US. And Belarus is using cheap airlines or their own aircrafts to import people to start a security situation, security incidents on the Polish border and influence the situation and unrest both in Poland and in Germany, where these groups of migrants are sometimes forcefully and definitely illegally trying to cross the border and to get to the desired place of origin. So these two elements only, and there are more, show the differences. And the type of response is definitely multi-level. It is about coherence. So we will see how coherent and effective policy of Donald Trump will be. We know that Joe Biden was much more effective.
We will see the execution of it.
We will see it. Well, let's judge it by the fruits if we're going into biblical language of preference of Donald Trump. But we're gonna see that because we've seen that Donald Trump's policy in the first term on migration were not effective, judged by the numbers, while Biden has effectively limited the numbers of the illegal border crossing and people that would essentially bring the challenge to the US. The perception hasn't changed. The perception might have actually gone a reverse side, but that's another thing. Now, what sort of influence, global influence on this policy Donald Trump might have? I mean, two sides. On one side, we know that some of his rhetorical arguments brought the adverse, the opposite. He wanted tariffs and trade wars, and that only speeded up trade partnerships between the EU and some of the other countries. So about wars on the borders, protecting borders, that may produce unintended consequences from the point of view of the ideology they stand for. We're going to see. Definitely in Poland, we're going to stick to our policies, regardless of the government, in terms of reviewing both the technical, the security, and the legal language that helps us to deliver humanitarian response and human rights to people who are in the protected territory of the sovereign state of Poland and on the territory of Europe. And as we know from the public officials from the Polish government, that may include reviewing the international code of conduct regarding asylum seekers, because some of the conventions were not drafted in the age of cheap air flights.
And such globalization as well.
Right, so that would be all from Wojciech Przybylski, political analyst at Visegrad Inside. Thank you very much.
Thank you for joining us. A very busy day, a lot to unpack. But now I think it's time for a short break, but please do stay with us as we will be bringing you more on Donald Trump's inauguration.
Congratulations, Mr. President.
Lifelong politician Joe Biden took office in 2021 at the age of 78, becoming the oldest sitting president in U.S. history. His tenure was defined by global crises and domestic challenges that resulted in a number of successes for his administration. Immediately after taking office, the introduction of a nearly $2 billion financial plan helped the US climb out of the post-pandemic downturn more quickly than many other G7 nations. But perhaps Biden's greatest success was reasserting US leadership within NATO in response to Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. With his active support, the alliance was strengthened by 2 new members on the Kremlin's doorstep, Finland and Sweden. Biden's involvement included pushing numerous financial aid bills through Congress to support Ukraine's defensive efforts. In 2023, spending on Ukraine aid commitments was greater than on many domestic agencies, with nearly $80 billion pledged to Kyiv. But his presidency was not without its missteps. One of the lowest points was the chaotic withdrawal of US troops from Afghanistan in 2021 that left many Afghans stranded under Taliban rule. Immigration also proved to be an albatross. Coming primarily from South America, migrant numbers at the US borders surged to more than 2 million in the first year of his presidency, where it remained until the end of his tenure. As a result, he garnered political backlash from both major parties. All in all, despite promises to unify the country, Biden struggled to bridge deep political divides at home. Ultimately, pressure from within a Democratic Party concerned by his age and potential health problems caused him to step out of the race for re-election. With the 82-year-old now retired, history will likely view his presidency as a story of balancing ambition with the realities of governance in a polarized era.
One of the biggest questions of Donald Trump's second term is how he will conduct his foreign policy, what will change, and what could possibly be a continuation of what we've heard and seen before.
Another important question consists of what will be the foreign policy's greatest challenges for the new president. And to answer these, we have Sasha Farbach joining us again for a short explainer. Sasha?
Thanks, guys. So let's begin with this new face that we now are familiar with, the world according to Donald Trump. So this is now the big question. Everything from China, Russia, NATO. Let's just see of what we know already through some of the campaign trail quotes. So let's pull up the first one now, right now, here, what he said at that press conference back in Florida. Very much about gaining how he would deal with Greenland, for instance. Now, I want to just point to a couple of points here. National security purposes, that's what we need Greenland for. He mentions it a few times, and he also goes to warn. You have China ships all over the place, and you have Russian ships all over the place. Now, there's a theme here. I want to go to the next one, because we heard about Panama in his opening actual speech. So let's go to the next slide briefly, and we see it right there. Again, warnings. We need this for economic security. He mentioned that again, so this will have more people a little bit concerned, because Panama is now mentioned in his speech very directly. He wants that back. And he says here, Panama Canal is vital to our country. It's being operated by China. So once again, very much how he constructs this is very much also a warning, and this could shape up how he is going to deal with other powers, Russia and China included. So this has come up twice. Let's go also to the next one. So more clues here. This is on the campaign channel as well, very much chastising those who are not paying, what he called delinquent countries in NATO, saying he doesn't matter what Vladimir Putin would do. In fact, I would encourage them to do whatever the hell they want. You got to pay your bills. So not quite understanding, let's say, how GDP defense works truly, but it has been effective, and it will continue to be effective because people will be afraid of this. And of course, NATO spending for allies has increased significantly since 2017. Now, is that down to Trump? He will claim that victory for himself. But of course, NATO countries have gathered more money, have invested heavily. So, of course, Poland leading the charge there with well over 4%. So let's go into that a bit more, because I think this is really key here. Poland as that key ally, that someone called that good European, as the country that is spending a lot on defense. Like, remember that 2% average for 32 NATO countries. Poland is stepping that up by 4%, potentially even 5% in the near future. So let's look at what's happened. With his trip to Poland in 2018, very much a lot of close defense ties were established between Andrzej Duda and also Donald Trump. Various agreements. So that troop deployment, during his time in 2019, we saw that rotation increase to 1,000 U.S. troops on the ground in Poland. This also led to another agreement back in 2020, enhanced defense cooperation, very much setting the infrastructure, also the rotational part of U.S. soldiers on the ground. Eventually, that was the idea floated of Fort Trump by the Poles, really wanting a permanent presence in Poland. And that's actually what came later in 2023 with Fort Kościuszko near Poznan in the west of the country. But very much, as you can see, also a groundwork laid here by Trump by huge amounts. Look, $4.75 billion for Patriot missile systems, also a lot of other hardware. Let's look at the next one here, which is see some of that hardware that Poland has purchased from the United States already in order. You see the F-35, one of the most high-level combat aircraft. So 32 of those ordered by Poland. The Abrams battle tank also ordered. Also the Patriot missile battery, as I mentioned. But also you've got the Apache helicopters, you've got the HIMARS. So a huge package of huge investment from Poland, from the United States. So this is going to make Trump happy. This is transactional. To see if this will now be enough leverage for Poland to use that, potentially also to continue Trump's involvement in the alliance. So Poland is key. So that security element is going to be really, really vital. And that is a policy that any party in Poland connects with on the defense and security front. All right, so let's go on further. And also, it's not just about defense. It's also about energy and energy independence. Now, very much since Russia cut off that gas back in the end of, or rather after the invasion in 2022, Poland very quickly adapted. As you can see here in this chart, ever since the LNG imports have increased very much, 2021, up and up and up, increasing. Now, there's a hub in the northwest of Poland. One of these ports is LNG in Świnoujście. Now, this is going to be increasingly more and more important for Poland. Energy is key. 3 Cs as well. That's very much also about energy independence. Now, Trump will very much look at this, but Poland, I think, has played a very interesting role here and could do much more, and that's going to be for the defense of NATO and the eastern flank. So we'll see how that truly does play out, and that's all for the snippets of foreign policy that we can already see, and let's see how it actually plays out in the future.
Thank you so much. That was Sasha Farbach bringing us a breakdown of foreign policy under Donald Trump during his second term in office.
Thank you indeed, Sasha. And now we are about to be joined by our next guest tonight. Velina Chakarova, founder of FACE Geopolitical Consultancy, is with us. Good evening.
Pleasure to have you.
Good evening. Thank you for having me.
So there was definitely a lot to talk. There is definitely a lot to talk about after the inaugural speech. There was more focus put on the U.S., but we have to mention the bigger picture. There was very little mentioned about how the new administration is going to deal with issues and challenges outside of its borders. There were some mentions, and the thing that comes to mind is Russia and China, some of the influences that are very prevalent, especially in the EU. How do you think, what are your expectations regarding Trump's current term in terms of relationship with China, with Russia, and with the EU?
Well, before I actually give you my, let's say, assessment regarding Trump's geopolitical portfolio when it comes to the relations with China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, I would just like to give you one geopolitical takeaway from Trump's inauguration speech that's directly related to foreign policy and security. And if you recall, actually, his inauguration speech, he views his proudest legacy as ending wars and preventing wars with American participation. And what does it mean? I think that it already gives you a clue regarding Eastern Europe and especially, of course, Ukraine, as well as Gaza. But when it comes to Gaza, where the ceasefire has become operational on January 19, we've already received confirmation about the Trump effect, namely that because of the re-election of Trump, this ceasefire was finally possible. Now, additionally, in his speech from this evening, Trump appeared to be quite sure about the reactivation of the so-called Monroe Doctrine, and he gave us two pieces of clue. First being the one that he will rename the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America, and the second being Panama Canal, which means that he will claim, or let's say the US will reclaim the Panama Canal, where we currently are witnessing the Chinese control. So these are I think, the most important takeaways from his inauguration speech. Now let's take a look at the broader picture. First and foremost, what is the long-term goal for the next 4 years? That's going to be China. China, when it comes not only to trade and economy, but this time it's going to be also about the competition in technology. Why? Because in the middle of the fourth industrial revolution, the winner takes all. That means that there will be only one superpower that, enabled by the fourth industrial revolution, similarly to what happened with the previous Cold War between the Soviet Union and the United States, where only one power could emerge as a winner, will determine the new rules of the game. That means the new global order. And next to the technological competition, what we are going to see, and I think this was perfectly clear also in his inauguration speech, is ideological component. Because once again, there is going to be an ideological competition next to the economic, the trade, the technological wars with China. The good news here is that there is zero interest on both sides, namely United States and China, to get involved in a direct kinetic confrontation. Maybe that's the good news for our audience tonight, and probably for the Europeans in general. So this is not World War III. This is Cold War 2.0 between two superpowers. But what's even worse, and now I come to the second point, which is Russia, because I've been a guest to your program while claiming over the last 3 years. Soon we will have the third anniversary of the Russian war against Ukraine. And what I said already 3 years ago was that this war would have never been possible, and Russia would have never launched a full-scale war against Ukraine if he had not relied on the comprehensive long-term support by China, the so-called dragon bear modus operandi of, so to say, strategic coordination in all systemically relevant domains. So we do not have just Cold War 2.0 between two superpowers. We have a Cold War 2.0 between United States on the one hand, of course, with Western allies and partners, and the dragon bear on the other side. That means that because of China, Russia is still able, after 3 years of a comprehensive Western support for Ukraine, and we saw some numbers on your screen when it comes to the American support. The European support is mind-blowing. Meanwhile, 150 billion euro for Ukraine, and even despite all this comprehensive support, the dragon bear is what's enabling this war to continue. Here, Trump is going to go for a ceasefire. That means at least some sort of, let's say, seizure of hostilities, establishing some sort of probably, let's say, gray zone between the front lines to enable, at least for a short period of time, actually the seizure of hostilities. There's going to be a lot of optics. We should be aware of the fact that Trump-Putin meeting is already being set up because most of the Republicans around Trump, that means the closest of his team in terms of analysts and consultants and people who have really important sayings, let's say, they are China hawks. They are not necessarily Russia hawks. So they think that they can actually, in short term, that they can accommodate Russia in order to cope with the long-term problem.
Here's something that I need to ask you. Now, Donald Trump seems very serious about his campaign promises. And I remember during the campaign he also mentioned the possibility of leaving NATO if NATO member states fail to pay the 2% threshold. And now that you're saying that he will focus on China, is this scenario becoming more and more real?
You mean the scenario of NATO exit?
Yes.
I don't see NATO exit, to be honest with you, I don't see NATO exit as a real tangible plan on behalf of Trump, especially given his very ambitious program at home, and he is certainly not interested in antagonizing all partners and allies. Also because a lot of them, especially in Central Eastern Europe and in the Scandinavian part along the eastern flank of NATO, they are quite motivated to keep the American presence strong, and not just NATO presence, but the American presence. And one important piece of information for you, which was not mentioned in the preparation on the American, on the first mandate of Trump, is that Trump reduced the number of US troops all over the world, with the only exception in Central Eastern Europe. So once again, this is going to be the Iron Curtain 2.0. He is very much aware of that. It's just that he doesn't see any prospect for direct NATO-Russia or US-Russia confrontation. That's the reality. And because of that, he will be expecting a much stronger role on behalf of the European allies. The European allies will have to take care of this, problem in the future, and that does not mean exit from NATO. That does not mean actually seizure of U.S. aid for Ukraine. In fact, I would argue that in the future we might see bigger and stronger support for Ukraine, but in the context of Make America Great Again, that means that Ukraine will have to purchase and buy American weapons and support the American defense industry. I don't buy into this scenario. What I think is going to be interesting, and maybe that's final foresight on my side for 2025 and beyond, is because of let's say, possible or potential success of Trump with ceasefires in both, most comprehensive military conflicts right now. That means in Gaza, and then in the next 6 months, as he claimed, in Ukraine. Russia and China, I argue, will actually try to open a third geopolitical front for Trump. That would mean that we will see actually the highest number of tensions in the Indo-Pacific, in South China Sea, in the Strait of Taiwan, and with the North Korea space and nuclear programs. Why? Because China and Russia want to coin Trump as a war president against all odds, because he wants to actually put this mandate into the context of being not just pacifist, but unifier. This was the word he used in his inauguration speech.
If that was...
And I think that this will be something that European powers are currently not regarding as a possible scenario and are not prepared for.
If that were to happen, wouldn't you say that the U.S. should actually be looking for more allies and having stronger ties, especially in regards to foreign policy?
The U.S. will have a lot of allies all over the world. I mean, that is...
No, but to maintain the relationship, to maintain the good strategic working relationship, for example, in between the EU and the U.S.
Unfortunately, we will see both trends happening simultaneously. There will be stronger relationships between individual European countries and United States. And yet there will be also a lot of troubles and tensions between, let's say, the collective European Union as an actor, be it the European Union organizations and institutions, or let's say also the big European players such as France and Germany because of their political problems right now, and these problems are not going to disappear, in 2025. So it's going to be a mixed picture of both happening simultaneously, if you like, some sort of bifurcation of the old continent because of the new demands coming from Washington. How do you think will the European powers position themselves if, let's say, there would be a serious tension in the Indo-Pacific and suddenly Trump demands a similar attitude and position from the European powers as the one by the United States when the Russian war against Ukraine began?
Thank you so much, Velina Chakarova, founder of Phase Geopolitical Consultancy. Pleasure to have you on the program. Thank you for joining.
Thank you very much.
And Velina Chakarova was our last guest this glorious evening.
What a day.
All dedicated to Donald Trump's inauguration. Claudia, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Maciej. Thank you to all of our viewers who joined us here during this special day, Donald Trump's inauguration, the 47th President of the United States, finally returning back to the Oval Office. Thank you for joining us, but please do stay tuned here on TVP World as we are back in just a moment with more news and features.
See you soon.